He's Nick Wright, host of First Things First on Fox Sports 1 and What's Right with Nick Wright on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for joining us. Let's go back to Sunday morning. Your level of confidence was what?
Extremely high. Listen, I said to you, I think, I'm sure I did, that I knew they could lose. I thought it was 0% they lost to the Texans. I thought they could lose to the Bills, but I would have been shocked. And I thought they could lose to the Eagles, but I would have been shocked. What I obviously did not anticipate at all was the method in which they lost. And one of the reasons I was so confident is I had said this is a team that you can't blow out, and if it's close late, you trust Patrick. And so I didn't think the Chiefs were going to blow out Philly. You know, I have respect for Philly, and I think they're a great roster and even better than I expected. But yeah, my confidence Sunday morning, maybe what might be more instructive is my confidence Saturday night, Dan, when at a few Super Bowl parties, a few drinks in, every Eagles fan I saw, if they started talking to me, I'd very earnestly look them in the eye and say, I really hope tonight is one of the best nights of your life because tomorrow is going to be one of the worst.
Oh, my God.
And that didn't, it happens, I suppose.
When did you realize you were in trouble during the game?
Probably later than I should have, Dan, to be honest with you. 10-0, I felt fine. They've come back from 10-0 down in every not 10-0, but 10 down in every Super Bowl. The pick six even, obviously at that moment, I'm like, oh, you're up against it now. But I still felt, okay, get the ball, score, get the ball after half, fine. The 3 and out after the pick six, everyone points to the interception the next drive. But the 3 and out is what was, to me, really concerning because it was like, oh, they know now they've got to go and they don't have answers. So in that moment, I was like, oh, they're probably cooked. But then one of the downsides, Dan, to a long halftime, so you have enough time to walk around, and I had gosh darn it, I think addicts call it a moment of clarity. And I was like, this whole thing started down 24-0. The first Super Bowl they ever won, down 24-0, and then go on a run. And now down 24-0 with Mr. 28-3 in the booth to pull off the three-peat. I'm like, oh my, and I'm now at halftime. I spent most of the time formulating my Monday argument as to why a 24-0 comeback is so much better than a 28-3 comeback. And turns out I won't need that argument.
But how do you explain this? If somebody didn't see it, you would say, this is why it happened.
I would say the two most basic reasons are as follows. And they both oddly have a direct game corollary. And same game. Reason one, the single most, and this is not high-level analysis, but it's just a truism of football. The single most effective way to disrupt a great quarterback is if you can get constant pressure without sending extra guys. Because they're already at a numbers disadvantage. You got 5 blocking 4 and the quarterback. So if you can get pressure with those 4, your 7 get to guard their 5, right? And so that's the single best way to do it. They did it brilliantly. It was the best any team had done it in at least 15 years in a Super Bowl. More on that in a moment. And the second reason is, for the first time all year, the moment got to the team and got to Patrick. They have been, like, I'm not here to make excuses. I will give context if people want to act like Patrick is the first. In fact, he just joins every other quarterback ever to have a truly brutal playoff game. But the moment got to him, it felt like. And the last time, and this is where sports are great, in my lifetime, there have only been 2 NFL games played where a team walked onto the field and knew, if we win today, we are the greatest team of all time. the '07 Super Bowl, Patriots, Giants, and this year's Super Bowl. Now, different greatest team. '07 was going for single season, Chiefs going for the greatest, stretch. And it was the exact same blueprint in both games. Got home with 4, and one of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen was skittish and didn't play well. Like that is what happened. Now, that game was close, obviously. This game was not, but that defensive performance, holding that Patriots team to 14 points, it was unthinkable. They were 14-point favorites. And so we saw it, a team that all year long, the moment was never too big for them. Watching it, the first third down of the game, Dan, little easy pass, Mahomes throws it a little behind, and Kelsey doesn't quite grab it. And you're like, oh, that's weird. That was an important play. It's Kelsey and it's Mahomes, and they were both a little off, and that was the story of the game.
How much of a hit to Mahomes' aura do you think he took?
Aura is a great question. So I think temporarily it's a big hit. This is, again, where the 2021 AFC Championship game, coming off a year they had been blown out in the Super Bowl against Tampa, and they're up 21-3 on Cincinnati, and then Mahomes played the worst half of his life, and they lose. And then they trade Tyreek Hill. The aura, the mystique, all of it was dead and gone. They were a one-time champion who had back-to-back tough playoff losses, and then they spent the last 3 years building that back up, so they're going to have to do that again. Can we talk legacy stuff for a moment here?
Sure.
Because I don't think you've done this, but what is really frustrating to me, though, is folks acting like, listen, if you're an all-time great, this doesn't happen to you. The fact of the matter is every single all-time great ever, this has happened to. We know Elway got annihilated in a bunch of Super Bowls, 55-10 most notably. Marino got annihilated in his only Super Bowl. Peyton Manning got annihilated 43-8. People will say Joe Montana never did. In fact, Joe Montana was perfect in Super Bowls. That is true. Joe Montana also, in the smack dab middle of his prime, in back-to-back-to-back years, was one and done in the playoffs. Back-to-back-to-back years, 0 playoff touchdowns. Back-to-back-to-back years, blown out in the playoffs by a combined score of 102-30. So, and then people say, what about Tom? Tom, the year he was going for a three-peat, didn't get to have his meltdown in the Super Bowl because he threw a pick 6 to let a game get out of hand against Jake Plummer in round 2. So I'm not making excuses. I am saying the one thing Patrick had on his resume, depending on how you judge that Tampa Super Bowl, was never a moment like this. Now he has it, and he joins literally every other quarterback ever.
Yeah, I'd only push back on a little bit with that. If Mahomes had won 40-22, we might be having a conversation of a larger picture of Mahomes with Brady now. Now they're even.
So that is where I totally agree with you. What this game did, I think anyone acting like it moved Mahomes backwards, I think is being dishonest or unfair. Not only did it stall the progress, but had they won, I would have come on here and said he doesn't need 7. In fact, he might already be the best ever. 7 years, 4 rings, a three-peat, boom. But now Brady also went back-to-back, right? So, you didn't do something he didn't do. So now it's like he walked onto the field, and it's like there could be a real GOAT debate Monday morning. A real debate, I think. And now the earliest that can probably happen is 2030. And so, yes, I agree with you entirely on that.
He's Nick Wright, host of First Things First on Fox Sports 1. What's Right with Nick Wright on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. I'll move on from the Chiefs here for a moment. I mentioned Kevin Durant going to 30,000 career points, and I think it's a slight to call him one of the greatest scorers of all time because it really limits just your focus of what Kevin Durant really is. Dirk Nowitzki was a great scorer. Allen Iverson, a great scorer. Alex English, a great scorer. Kevin Durant is far more than that. He's a better basketball player than Steph Curry. But it feels like when you say he's one of the great scorers of all time, I don't think we look at the totality. So I'm curious where you see Durant and his placement.
I agree with a lot of what you said. Just flatly calling him a better basketball player than Steph Curry, I'd have to spend more time thinking about, but I understand the point. In my head, and this is the ultimate compliment insult, I kind of put him in the same category as Shaq, which is one of the greatest players ever who did not reach their potential. So, like, he's one of the 15 to 20 greatest players of all time, and that was probably a worst-case scenario for him. And that's a bummer.
So Nick Wright is staying with us, of course, the host of First Things First on Fox Sports 1. What's Right with Nick Wright on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Had a rough weekend. Had a weekend that was worse than Mahomes or Drake, which is saying a lot. So,
first of all, what is this, a Ken Burns documentary? How long are your commercial breaks? My God, I said I'd sit through the break. I didn't know. I mean, my God.
Well.
So here's the benefit of, there's not a lot of benefits of the fact that you're not a listener to the ever-growing and very popular What's Right with Nick Wright podcast, hosted with my son, DeMonze. One of the benefits is you're going to get to hear the story for the first time. Subscribers and listeners got to hear it yesterday.
Oh, okay.
Subscribe on YouTube.
Okay.
All right. Saturday night for the Super Bowl, I'm at one of the many Super Bowl parties.
Of course.
You've met my wife. She's with her best friend. Both beautiful women. As often is the case, whenever we go to like some, nightclub type place, we haven't been in there 5 minutes. And all of a sudden, some group of fellas have been like, hey, we have a section. You guys want to sit here? They're wearing heels. So they're like, yeah. My wife then says to me, do you want to sit? I'm like, no, I'm going to go ahead and not sit in these fellas section who invited you in because you're beautiful and they have no idea we're together. You guys go ahead. I'll have fun. Circle around. UFC fights on a giant screen. So I'm just standing kind of close to the section, watching the UFC fight, having a few cocktails. At some point, after I stood there a while, a woman walks up to me, says, can I ask you a question? I'm like, of course. Why do you talk so bad about Jalen Hurts? I'm like, well, I don't know that I do. And, I do a little tap dancing. And she's like, no. And she seems to have some very quotables. Some I said, some I didn't. And I'm like, okay, okay. So here are the good things I've said. Here are the critical things I've said. I throw on some of that patented Nick Wright charm, and I figure we're going to be out of here quickly. Not budging an inch. And then I realized something Dan probably would have realized earlier had I not been a couple cocktails in. And I said, ma'am, may I ask you a question? She said, yeah. I said, are you Jalen Hurts' mother? She said, yes, I am. I'm like, God, dog it. I'm like, and I said, well, I'm now in a terrible position. She said, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you're his mom. I'm supposed to right now be like, ma'am, I'm so sorry. Your son's amazing. I'm playing a character on TV. Like, it's my job. Because you're his mom. I was like, however, I don't know if you respect me to begin with, but if I do that, you certainly won't. It's like, so now I feel like I have to say to you why I believe the somewhat negative things I've said about your son as a thrower of the football. And she's like, yes, go ahead. And Dan, when I tell you, I stood there for 15 minutes. Having a conversation about, like, listen, I thought he handled the benching at Alabama incredibly well. I think this. I was like, now, did I call him the weak link of the Eagles offense? I did. However, the context of that is I think they have a top two everything else. I think it's top two quarterback. And she really grilled me. And then I look to my sides and I'm like, I don't know if these are cousins, brothers, uncles, or whatever, but I'm now kind of flanked by what appears to be the Hurts family. And so She says to me at the end, she was like, what are you going to say? She didn't say it harshly. She said, what are you going to say when he wins? And because I'm me and I can't ever stop being me, I'm like, well, if he wins. She's like, no, when he wins. Yeah. And I was like, well, I got to see the game first, but then we'll see. And, it was nice. And I got out of it. I went outside sweating bullets. I didn't know. It was like, I don't know what just happened, but that's my night before the Super Bowl story, Dan.
Why didn't you have Jalen Hurts' mom on your YouTube podcast?
Invite open.
But that's called good producing right there.
Well, so here, you know what? That opens the door to a second great story, and then I'll let you go.
Is it going to be better than that story?
No chance.
Oh, because that wasn't a great story.
What do you mean?
Okay, let's go around the room. Todd, was that a great story?
I think it was a good story.
All right.
An interesting
Seton.
story.
It was a good story.
All right. Marvin?
Good story.
Yeah. Paulie?
I'm going very good. The tease and then it being the mom and the way he ramped up to it, I'm going very good.
But not great. I was more concerned with your wife and her friend at a table full of guys.
I know. I added that. Now that you've heard the story, totally irrelevant detail, just to make sure you were locked in, buddy. Because I knew that was the Chekhov's gun of the story, except it was never used. I need a better producer. That's unfair. I love my producers. But not everybody can have a Fritzy. Fritzy, who texts me mid-Super Bowl, knowing what pain I'm in, then post-Super Bowl, and then when I defer and I'm like, hey, I can't, he then is like, oh, that's interesting. Because I see another show is promoting an upcoming appearance you're having. And I'm like, well, that other show is the TV show on the network that pays me. So, yes, as much as I love Dan, I do have to do that, and then I'll come on. Fritzy's a bulldog, man.
All of that is very true.
Thinking, am I lying?
He's done that before to people who have lost, had emotional losses, but before the game is over, when you think you're going to win, and he'll say, hey, when you win, we want to have you on, and then they lose in dramatic fashion. So, Fritzy, it's not just you, Nick, but you're right. I tell him to go get people, and he goes and gets people.
Well, I kind of finally saw the sausage was made. It was always amazing to me before we even knew each other. I'm like, man, I know people really like and respect Dan Patrick, but he gets all of the guests you'd want the day you want them. And it turns out it's because you employ a psychopath.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, that is true. That is fair. That is fair. So the other story that
was it.
Oh, that was the story. Oh, okay.
That was a great story. That one you guys will like because it's
But that's a story we've heard many, many times from different people here. Seton, you had something to say to Nick?
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to say about Nick's story, it was a solid move, including the bit about your wife and the table, because not only did you reinforce that your wife is beautiful, but also you just proved that you're supremely confident. Like, no, babe, go ahead. You go sit. I'm good. Don't worry about it. I'm going to go walk around. You go have fun. I'll see you later. Don't worry about it. That's a solid flex.
Oh, well, thanks. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that too. How about that?
Babe,
solid enough flex.
Go ahead, have fun. You're gorgeous. Go enjoy yourself. Don't worry about it. See you at the end of the night.
You ever walked into a room, been in a room with Nick when he walks in? I mean, he's not suffering from insecurity. Just saying. Maybe he should, but I'm just saying, when he walks in like Ric Flair. Yeah. It's like, hey, easy here, dude. Wow, that's a bright red coat.
I knew you were going to bring up the coat. I knew you were going to bring up the coat. And
did you get your coat from that restaurant yet?
The gun club you took me to? No, I didn't. I've never been back.
That coat is still okay. All right, I'll get it, and I'll take it to my apartment.
That's gone. That was a year and a half ago.
There's nobody that's going to take that coat, Nick.
Oh,
nobody can wear that coat.
I wasn't. That's not the orange coat. The orange coat I would have gotten. That was because you mocked the orange coat so badly. I wore a much more conservative, subdued. I think it's called camel coat, and I left it. I'll see you, man.
How much money did you lose on Sunday?
It's less about how much I lost and more about what I would have won. Because I actually didn't have to bet the game directly because it is complex. I'm in a gambling consortium where we trade futures like stocks. So I had basically a downside risk of less than $10,000 if the Chiefs lost, and an upside of just north of 70 if they won. And a lot of people then would have just bet 30 on the Eagles and lock in a big profit. But there's a name for those people. They're called cowards. And so I just let it ride.
Keep your head up. Keep your head up. As I told you
great.
Sunday night, keep your head up.
Talk to you later.
Two Pete. Let's make shirts up. That's Nick Wright, host of First Things First on Fox Sports 1. What's Right with Nick